I am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today, and we have a special guest coming from us from the East Coast. We have Laura Handel. Lauren, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know where you're located and a little bit about your firm.
Sure. Well, my firm is called Handel Food Law, and I'm based in northern New Jersey. My clients come from the New York, New Jersey area for the most part, but also sort of all over the country and actually all over the world. And what is common among all of my clients is that they are involved in the food business in some way. So I represent everyone in the food chain from producers through distribution, retailers, restaurants, and caterers. And I provide a variety of legal services for them, but all focused on food businesses.
Excellent. And we met originally, I believe, through the American Agriculture Law Association while you were getting your LLM at the University of Arkansas. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your experience getting your LLM?
Sure. Well, I had a different type of practice for the beginning of my career. For the first 10 years, I was mostly doing litigation and decided that I wanted to change my career, but stay a lawyer and represent businesses that I cared more about, frankly. And was really fortunate to find the LLM program. An LLM, for people who don't know, is a Master of Laws. It's sort of an advanced legal degree for people who already have a JD. But it's focused on a specialized area of law. And so in this case, I got to spend a year studying agricultural and food law, which was really great for me, and also to spend a year in Arkansas. And it really helped me to learn brand new areas of law and get introduced to all of the various issues that farmers and food manufacturers and businesses face in their work.
Well, I've looked at the curriculum and the courses that you took, or at least part of the courses that you've taken, and I drool every time I look at it. So I'm very jealous of that experience there. So today we're going to talk about CSA Agreements, which CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. Lauren, why don't you start us off and just talk a broad strokes. What is a CSA? What is a CSA agreement?
Okay. Well, as you said, community supported agriculture. So it's a way for farmers to sell products, but also generally it helps with cash flow greatly, because usually the way that CSA members or the customers, the people who are going to buy the produce or other products of a farm, pay for that is in advance. So it can really help a farmer to get that money up front, even before the growing season, and have commitments that they will have people available to buy their products as you get further into the season. So usually it's sort of a subscription. Maybe the customers don't pay all at once. They might break it up into a few payments over the season. And they're promised that they will get something in exchange in terms of whatever the output of the farm is, but there's usually not a firm commitment, because the whole idea is that the community is sort of sharing in the risk and rewards of farming, and recognizing that, especially for beginning farmers, it may be very uncertain how much they will be able to produce, and maybe certain crops do really well, but others just don't, for a variety of reasons. And everyone knows that that's all sort of part of the fun and experience of it.
So I know that CSAs are more traditionally in the produce arena with vegetables, but I don't know about you, Lauren, but I've seen meat CSAs, I've seen even pie CSAs. So I don't know what kind of other CSAs have you seen, or what are the most popular? Have you seen many dairy CSAs?
I haven't seen a dairy-only CSA. I would like a pie CSA
Yes,
if I ever had.
right?
That sounds great. Actually, I was a member of a CSA that was, I guess, had a family member who made really great pies and offered those as part of their CSA. But I think produce is generally the core of a CSA. And often they will also offer other products that are either grown on that same farm, or they might partner with some neighbors to be able to offer a wider variety of products, including value-added products. So it can be a wide variety of things.
So the people that are, quote, the members or subscribers, first of all, which word do you prefer when you're talking about the CSA subscribers? Do you prefer subscribers? Do you prefer members? What's your favorite word there?
So for legal reasons that are not great for marketing purposes, I prefer just customers. Members is probably the most common. There is a concern, I think it's a kind of theoretical legal concern that I haven't seen actually enforced in any way, but there is some legal concern that the members or shareholders of a CSA might be considered security owners, which would trigger all kinds of legal requirements that no one is going to want to deal with. So it is best if everyone operates as though what is happening is people are prepaying for goods rather than investing in a business and sharing along with the risks and rewards of the business.
So I've been a part of a CSA once whenever I was living on the Upper West Side. So we can talk a little bit through that transaction, but walk me through like a typical transaction. What time of year do the customers usually become members, first of all?
So usually early in the year, before the growing season gets going. CSAs that I've been a part of, I've joined in like January, February. Some of the really popular ones sign up the year before. So it all just depends on sort of the demand, but usually early on, even before anything is planted.
And are the customers paying 100% upfront at that time of the year, or do some CSAs allow for a payment program?
I think often they allow for payments to be broken up, which also can be helpful for cash flow standpoint, to know that you'll have money coming in at certain times during the season can be really helpful. I think it's an option that people can either pay everything up front or break up those payments.
So when a customer becomes a CSA subscriber and they have a share, right? How do they know what they're going to get for that share?
Right.
And
So I think go ahead.
No, and I guess my second point is that if it is memorialized in the CSA agreement, and we'll get more into the weeds there in just a minute, how would you suggest that you define what a share is?
Right. Well, from a business standpoint, there can be a variety of different ways that would work for the farm and what they have to offer. Whatever it is that they plan to offer, they should be very clear and preferably put this in writing about what they are committing to. Right? It is a contract, even if it's not in writing. It is a contract, and also you want to keep customers happy. So you want to minimize the chances that people are going to be disappointed that they didn't get what they expected by being very clear about what you are and are not committing to. So it's done in a variety of ways. A lot of CSAs, I think probably the traditional model for a CSA is to promise a box per week or every other week, and sometimes people have the option of the size of the box or how frequently they want it, depending on how much they can consume in their household. And that box is often a variety of things, whatever happens to be available, but chosen by the farmer. That's the traditional way. Other kinds of CSAs, and one that I was a member of in New Jersey, which I absolutely loved, they had a very diverse selection of produce, and they would just put everything out on tables, and you had a basket, and you could go and pick what you wanted every week or every other week, depending on whether you got a full or a half share. And so that was nice to have some choice, but of course, then the farm has some risk that everyone's just going to want the tomatoes and no one's going to want the kale or whatever it happens to be. So again, it's a business decision as to how you structure that.
So the CSA that I was a member of, they told us what to take, and which was good and bad. The good part of it was I was forced to try vegetables that I had no idea anything about. It was the first time that I'd ever had seen or had tried kohlrabi. And
Uh-huh.
as part of my CSA, I was like, "What is this vegetable?" And so that was great, for me to learn. But then at the same time, I also felt like I was having some food waste and not really using everything that was part of my CSA. So speaking of food waste, what do CSAs do typically if there's food waste, people don't pick up their box or for whatever reason, and do you see any agreements along those lines in the CSA agreement?
Well, I think, again, there needs to be a business decision made and really clear communication with the customers about pickups. And that should also be part of the written agreement. When are the pickup times? And if the farm can be flexible, and obviously people are used to a lot of convenience in this day and age when it comes to food and their shopping. And so the more flexible that the farm can be is in terms of pickups, and if you can't make a particular pickup, if maybe you can pick it up the next day or double up the next week. That can all be helpful, but hopefully the farm also has other outlets for selling whatever doesn't get used by the customers in the CSA.
Yeah. All right. Let's get a little bit more into the weeds of the CSA agreement. I know that whenever I have clients that are involved in this type of direct farm marketing, I always request or give them advice to have a CSA agreement. Not all my clients listen to me, and there's a lot of CSAs out there that don't have written agreements. Um, as a, what do you recommend that needs to be in the CSA agreement? Like, what would be the most important terms in your mind?
Sure. And I think it can be a really simple document. I mean, in general, people are afraid of contracts, and it sounds like this big scary thing, and yet they're making contracts all the time and don't realize that they're doing it.
Yeah.
They just haven't put them in writing, which makes things difficult when there are disputes and people won't agree about what they agreed to. So that's the advantage of having something in writing, and it can be really simple. The most important things are the payment terms, so exactly how much money is going to be paid, when, and in what form. Are you going to take check? Is there some other way, Venmo or some other way that you'll accept payment? Be really clear about that. Um, Cancellation and refund policies. That's also something that's really important to clarify in a written agreement and make sure that all parties are on board with the understanding that either there's going to be no refunds. I mean, that again, the initial idea of a CSA is that you're going along for the ride and sharing in the risk. And so even if things don't work out the way you hoped they would, you're not getting your money back. But if that's the case, then it's really important to be clear about that. Some CSAs can be more flexible and allow people to cancel and get some money back, or maybe not be responsible for the payments that are due later in the season. Again, the pickup and or delivery terms, some CSAs actually deliver to their customers. So to be really clear about how customers are going to get what they're buying. And then again, I would just be sort of careful, just as a general how you draft this, just to be careful about making it clear that what we're talking about is buying goods rather than investing in a business.
So about the third term, about the pickup and or delivery, I know that the CSA that I was a part of, I was allowed to send a friend to go pick up vegetables for me if I had to be late at the office or something like that. Do you recommend that those types of provisions are included in the CSA agreement, allowing third parties perhaps to pick up? I mean, would you take it one step further and ask for written authorization? I mean, how would you recommend handling that?
Yeah, I think it can't hurt to mention that you'll allow other people to pick up. These things generally aren't super formal, so I would highly doubt that anybody would require that somebody come with a written authorization. Maybe some CSAs are much more careful than the ones I've experienced, but yeah, so I don't think it needs to get into a lot of details. I mean, really, usually I kind of wince slash laugh, roll my eyes when a client tells me they want a one-page agreement, because it's almost never possible to draft a one-page contract. CSA contract, I actually think you could get on one page. It could be
Yeah,
really.
I've seen them in one page, and I mean, they're brief, but I think you can do it. Let's circle back to the first thing that you mentioned, which was the payment terms. So of course I'm thinking through like when payment is due, if there's a payment plan, when the installments are due, and what payment methods. But what about volunteer CSA shares or a hybrid? I've seen those. Or what about CSAs that allow for half shares? How would you recommend sort of incorporating those variances there in the CSA agreement?
Sure. Well, the half share issue is really easy to take care of if the customer is paying for it, and just having different pricing structure mentioned in the agreement, a different price for a full share versus a half share. And that might mean, and just spelling out exactly what that means in terms of what the customer is getting. Is it either a smaller box or basket, or is it every other week as opposed to every week? The volunteer or work share issues raise other issues. I know this is fairly common. A lot of people want to part-time be farmers, right? It's fun as a recreational activity, or they feel like they want to help out their neighbors with their farm. But it's really important to keep in mind the potential liability issues associated with that, in terms of the risk of people getting hurt, and making sure you have insurance for that type of risk, but also the potential labor law issues that are associated and that could be triggered by those types of arrangements.
Right, because it's essentially in-kind compensation for their labor, effectively, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's one thing if you have customers, you allow them, and I've done this with CSAs that I've been part of, where they have certain things that you can pick yourself, and that's usually something that people enjoy doing. That's fine. That usually won't trigger any sort of other obligations. There are liability issues. You want to make sure that people are warned about any dangers, if there's things that aren't obvious that they could get hurt while they're doing that activity. But you don't generally have to worry about those people being considered employees from a legal perspective. The work share or volunteer situation is really much more murky, and you really do create the risk that legally you have an employment relationship, even if both parties agree that they're not employees. So one thing that people often don't understand about employment law is that you cannot waive your rights as an employee. And so people often think, oh, well, we'll just put it in our CSA agreement that this is a work share, but you're not my employee. And legally, that's not valid.
Lauren, my biggest pet peeve sometimes when I'm working with farms is that they'll say, but so and so down the road, he or she does it this way, so why can't I? And simply because your neighbor or a competitor farmer is doing it in one way does not necessarily mean that that farmer is in compliance. So I just wanted to make that point clear.
Yes, I hear the same thing all the time too.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about liability issues. How would you mitigate liability with the CSA in the CSA agreement?
Well, there's a few different types of liability. So the potential contractual liability, in terms of the customer not being satisfied with what they got, you mitigate by having a really clear written contract, and hopefully nobody can dispute later on what exactly was agreed to. So that's that type of liability. The other type of liability that any farmer selling food products has to be concerned about is that people will get sick from consuming the food. And then also, if you're going to have, as part of the CSA, that people visit your farm or come onto your property, and there's a potential for them to get hurt there, if there's accidents or injuries, then that's another type of liability. You could say something about that in the written agreement. You cannot disclaim liability for product liability. If you sell someone produce that's contaminated with E. coli and they get sick, even if you had some sort of liability waiver language in your agreement, I can't imagine that any state would enforce that type of liability waiver.
Yeah.
But you can be clear about the risks of doing work on a farm, or just even visiting a farm, There's a lot of potential hazards on an operating farm, and you have an obligation to warn people who come to your property about that. And so putting that in the contract isn't a bad idea. Even getting customers to sign a liability waiver isn't a bad idea. It at least proves that they acknowledge the risk, which might be useful in the event that someone gets hurt. It's not necessarily going to be enforceable as a true liability waiver.
Right.
And then, apart from all of that, there's insurance.
So let's talk a little bit more about insurance. How would you address it, if at all, in the CSA agreement? And what insurance issues do you think that a farm involved in direct farm marketing should consider?
I don't think you would say anything about it in the agreement, but any farm that's considering doing a CSA or that is a part of a CSA, sometimes CSAs are multi-farm CSAs, should evaluate what insurance they already have. Hopefully, they already have some insurance, some liability insurance, but if they don't, then that you need to get insurance, especially if we're going to be visiting the farm. But the best thing to do is to find a reliable insurance agent who can explain in plain English what is and is not covered in your policy, and who you trust that they are actually listening to you when you explain what you're doing with your business and with the CSA, because there's a variety of kinds of liabilities and not every policy will cover them.
Do you have any advice for our listeners on how to find a good insurance agent, somebody who understands agriculture and food production?
I wish I did. I think it's just word of mouth, in all honesty. Talk to your neighbors, talk to people who have more experience in farming than you do, and see if they have somebody, because really it comes down so much to the individual person.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So any other last issues regarding CSA agreements that we haven't hit on, especially in relation to maybe non-traditional CSAs, meat CSAs, any kind of dairy, eggs, etc.?
Well, just one more point on the multi-farm CSA. Whenever more than one farm is involved, and this is really becoming a new business venture, I think it's really important to treat it that way and to think about whether it needs to be formally organized as a business separate and apart from the individual businesses of the participating farms, because there could be liabilities associated with that. Let's say a produce farm is going to partner with a meat or a dairy farm so that they can have a multi-farm CSA. Well, there are risks associated with meat and dairy that don't necessarily go along with produce, and vice versa. And yet either of the participating farms could be held liable in the event that a customer gets sick. And so having a separate business venture, and it can be really easy to form a simple LLC that is the CSA and that has its own insurance, could help to protect everyone involved in that.
That's a great point. And I haven't even thought about that myself. And that certainly makes a lot of sense. So, Lauren, why don't you tell our listeners how they can find you on the internet?
Sure. Well, I have a website. It's handelfoodlaw.com. And I'm also on Facebook. My firm has a Facebook page, and I'm also on Twitter.
And we have listeners from coast to coast. And my final question is what advice do you give our listeners when they're trying to find the right agriculture lawyer in their community?
Again, I think it's a lot of word of mouth. That's how most people find me, is through referrals, which I'm very thankful for. It's important. I mean, obviously, we can all be found online these days. But it is important, I think, to have a reference from somebody who's worked with an attorney that is somebody you can trust.
Excellent. Thanks again, Lauren, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.